Since the release of its first season back in May of 2018, it didn't take long for Cobra Kai to become the biggest success story on YouTube. And with its titular cast of characters coupled with more references to the Karate Kid than fans could count, it's really no surprise. But what are some of the best Easter eggs from Season 4, and what do they all mean? For all this and more, stay tuned. Number 1, first of all, let's talk about the Yellow Convertible while we can. It took the show a whole 3 seasons before they finally introduced the youngster generation to Mr. Miyagi's most famous training technique. But we're happy to say that fans went crazy when they saw this reference at the start of Season 4. We are of course referring to the wax-on wax-off training regimen that Daniel-san made the new Miyagi-Do recruits attend to at the start of the season. But it might surprise you to hear that this little surprise had more in store for eagle-eyed fans. You see, it wasn't just the technique that referenced the origins of the franchise. The classic Yellow Convertible they were polishing has actually been a constant throughout the series and was first used by Mr. Miyagi all those years ago to assist Daniel-san in honing his karate blocking skills. True fans of the franchise will also know that this moment, which is one of the most quotable lines in the original film, is an important one when it comes to the character of Ralph Macchio. Remember, he went on to become a car salesman after leaving his karate career in the dust with the fall of Cobra Kai, showing that his time with the Yellow Convertible was far more influenceable than we first thought. So it makes absolute sense that he would continue this training regimen with the dojo he has now come to love. And as it turns out, he actually owns the original vehicle himself. Number 2, we also came to learn the importance of Coors Banquet beers for Johnny. While the true intention of the showrunners including a running advertisement for Coors Banquet beers has more to do with product placement on the show, Season 4 went on to explain why Johnny Lawrence has such an affinity for this alcoholic substance. As we're well aware, Johnny is the offspring of a rather terrible father who decided to abandon him when he was young. This resulted in the young man attaching himself to John Kreese back in the first Karate Kid and developing a bit of a bullying phase. And as it turns out, Daniel's son beating him at the All Valley Karate Championship actually left him in a rather downward spiral, which is far from what was shown to us at the end of the original movie. In fact, the older Johnny that was introduced at the start of Cobra Kai is nothing more than an alcoholic who has come to be addicted to the crisp taste of Coors Banquet beers. And while the majority of us didn't give a second thought to his love for this particular brand, other than the fact that it's really cheap, other fans theorized about what his taste in beer could mean. And with Season 4 now solidly completed, we finally have an answer. According to the lore, Johnny's father used to drink Coors all the time while he was growing up, and this is about the only way Johnny can actually feel closer to the man who abandoned him. Number 3, but that's not the only beer reference we ended up catching in Season 4. While learning the best of Miyagi-Do, it goes without saying that Johnny had some trouble. He has trained his entire life away based on the creed of Cobra Kai after all. So it isn't exactly a stretch to imagine that he would have far more trouble understanding the teachings of Miyagi than Daniel-san did back in the day, and it didn't exactly help to have Daniel ordering him around on odd jobs, which he actually used to do back in the first season of the show for money. Imagine working for your mortal enemy and not being paid. Then you'll know exactly how Johnny felt while training. So when he gets frustrated with his new sensei and decides to steal one of Daniel's beers, the Miyagi-Do teacher decides to chop at its bottleneck, sending it clean off. This is undoubtedly a reference to something we saw Mr. Miyagi do all those years ago when he and Daniel encountered some racists in the original film. But there's another hidden reference that went thoroughly unnoticed by many in this scene. When Johnny complains about the amount of fruit in Daniel's beer, he is no doubt saying that he would have been better off with a Coors. But look at the label and you'll see that he's been drinking a Blue Moon Belgium White, which is actually a brand owned by Johnny's all-time favorite beer, Coors. So by dunking on Daniel's beer, he's actually dunking on his own. Number 4, we also recognized one of our favorite films playing in the background. We are, of course, referring to Bloodsport, which is one of the most famous martial arts movies in the history of film and television. For those of you who don't know, Bloodsport came out around 4 years after the original Karate Kid and acted as a breakout role for Jean-Claude Van Damme as Frank Dux. And while the film was eventually discovered as being based on nothing more than a lie, with the claims of the real-life Frank Dux being refuted by experts across the globe, there was really no stopping the movie from reaching cult status. And to a large extent, this background information on the movie actually speaks loudly about the journey that Johnny has been on from the start of his karate career. Remember, he was 100% dedicated to Cobra Kai and its teachings, to such an extent that it was he who decided to revive the dojo. But in the end, the teachings that had been entrenched in Johnny by Kreese were nothing but lies based on manipulated intentions. And now that Johnny has finally made it to the side of good, it makes sense that the showrunners wanted to remind viewers where he came from with a subtle reference to the Johnny Lawrence endorsed film. It's not just that though. Pat Morita, best known as Mr. Miyagi, also played the role of David Leung in the Bloodsport franchise. Now that's impressive set design. Number 5, the beating of Kenny is also reminiscent of the first Karate Kid movie though. For those of you who don't remember, Dallas Young's character Kenny was catfished by Anthony and the rest of his meathead friends throughout the season. And when they had finally tricked him to cosplay as his favorite video game character, Dr. Scribblebottom, while parading at the park, the humiliation was pretty intense. The bullies then decided to chase Kenny until he was backed up against a cyclone fence, which saw him trapped and beaten in true Daniel-san fashion. Funny enough, this moment actually referenced one of the first memories we ever had of bullying growing up, and it involved our favorite Karate Kid, Daniel LaRusso. Think back to the first original film and you'll remember Johnny and his meathead friends chasing Daniel into a fence and beating him. Think a little harder and you'll also remember that they were all in costume back then as well, because they had just come from a Halloween party. So good on the showrunners for reminding us of where the show came from by paying homage to this brilliant scene. That being said, this was more than a simple reference though. You see, it shows that time doesn't really change anything. There will always be bullies out there who use their insecurities to make fun of others and get aggressive in an attempt to feel better. And it's for that reason that Miyagi-Do exists in the first place. Number 6, speaking of references, Ralph Macchio was actually in the news recently. And this had everything to do with his continued dislike for The Karate Kid Part 3. For those of you who weren't huge fans of the original trilogy, the third installment of the franchise featured Terry Silver, who season 4 of the show has finally introduced to viewers, and somewhat fleshed out as a character. And while Macchio maintains that he isn't a fan of the third installment to this day, his last interview had him saying that he's actually glad that Terry Silver got a better story arc in season 4 of Cobra Kai. In fact, according to Macchio, Silver might actually be the best villain that Cobra Kai could ever ask for. And he's incredibly happy that Thomas Ian Griffith could be brought on to bring the character to life. And he might be onto something, as the introduction of Silver in the 4th installment of Cobra Kai saw the franchise being propelled to the #1 position on the Netflix streaming platform, showing just how much fans enjoyed the recharacterization of Terry just as much as Macchio did. And there you have it, everything you need to know about the Easter eggs and news currently revolving around the season 4 of Cobra Kai. Which was your favorite reference though, and do you think season 5 is imminent? Feel free to let us know in the comments section down below.